we didn't talk about his illness. Nobody really knew that he was ill. And other than kind of GP visits and stuff, there wasn't really, again, much other than here's some tablets. From my memory, there was no other kind of offer of help to kind of support him to deal with it, with his illness. And so when he died, that came as a massive shock to so many people, because they didn't even know he had been that ill. Also, this was in the 90s. We've got better at talking about mental health now in the 2020s. Wasn't looking after my mental health, and I woke up one morning completely panicked, really, really scared. My partner at the time had already left for work. I'd overslept, and just remember being incredibly paranoid and really, really scared. And I looked out of the window. I thought people were watching me. My brother luckily came to get me. All of that fear, that judgment of what people would think, that real nervousness to show truly who I was. Yeah, because I think kind of stemming from being dyslexic, I've got quite good at learning different kind of coping mechanisms. I can only say from my own personal experience, but I just wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd spoken up a bit sooner, and I think that with my dad's suicide, if I'd got the right kind of help, gone to the right kind of spaces as you talked about, Andrew, that I felt comfortable in, maybe I wouldn't have had that mental health crisis.
Hi, my name's Andrew Payne, and welcome to the podcast Men On Show. And I am delighted to welcome Jon Salmon to Men On Show. Jon is founding member, CEO and CEO for the Speakers Collective. They promote over 100 different mental health lived experience speakers, everything from men's mental health to menopause, neurodiversity, suicide, domestic abuse. And following his own journey with mental health, losing a friend to suicide, Jon now speaks about awareness, reducing stigmas, saving lives. And he's also appeared with Will and Kate. Presumably, Jon, they were your supporting act. Jon, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, Andrew, great to be here. Great to, really looking forward to our conversation today.
Cool. And so I always ask this of all the guests that ever come on this show. Growing up as a kid, was there something or someone that particularly inspired you, something that stands out to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question to start with. Yeah, I think probably a few different people I think that have inspired me when I was growing up. I'm dyslexic. That's something that I didn't really. There wasn't a lot of sport for me when I was dyslexic. So there was people like Richard Branson, that's quite successful, obviously very successful entrepreneurs that have done quite a lot to also talk about and promote charities that bring awareness to dyslexia and neurodiversity. So yeah, kind of yeah, he was always somebody that I quite liked as a role model, and somebody that was quite fun and kind of taking on the kind of the big boys, I guess, when it came to business and stuff. So I quite like that. And then as I got slightly older, I guess in my kind of teenage years, it was which I guess we'll come to talk more about in a bit, but in the mental health space. So, you know, I've had my own challenges with my own mental health and also within my family. And so there was very, very few men that were talking about mental health when I was having my own problems. And those few men and guys that were doing that were people like Professor Green, Johnny Benjamin, and Stephen Fry, that you know these people that were showing a bit of vulnerability, I guess. That I think have definitely really inspired me as I've kind of grown up, because they have been open about who they really are, what makes them tick, and what struggles they sometimes have.
And how was school? You were dyslexic. You mentioned that. Um, do you recall that being a problem for you? Was school difficult because of that?
Yeah, like school was, I went to a boys' school, really, really sporty. If you were good at sports, you kind of seemed to get on at that school. Um, yeah, there was it, it wasn't really a great time at school. I did find it challenging. I didn't have any support at school for my dyslexia, and I guess just tried to get through the days. There was obviously things that I did like, but for me, the kind of eureka moment with education was when I left and decided not to carry on with sixth form A levels, and I went to college, and then that opened up a new way of learning. It was kind of
Yeah.
coursework. It wasn't just all exams. It was
Because
mixing with different people as well, so
yeah.
like different age groups and being in mixed groups rather than just single sex, kind of all boys school. Yeah, so it got better for me, but yeah, it was something I definitely struggled with reading and
Right.
writing.
So you with the dyslexia, that's the impact of you. You mentioned there were some challenges, so it was just harder to pick things up as quickly as you felt as other kids, or did you find yourself just daydreaming because you weren't getting it, or what? How did it? How was it a problem?
Yeah. I think what I've kind of for me, I realised the way I take on information, I kind of need kind of longer to process that. So I guess like some people are very good at just whacking their hand up, aren't they, in class, and just the info have got that information recall really quickly. Um, but I love learning about new stuff and really like trying to figure things out. But I think it just takes my brain a bit longer to do that. And sometimes within that kind of rigid school kind of, you've got 30 minutes to do maths, then you're on to French, and then,
Yeah.
that didn't really, suit my way of learning. And then you just start to think it's all those negative things like, oh, I'm a bit thick, I'm a bit slow. Um, and yeah, you're just kind of, you know, not really not really as supported as well as I should have been. I think within education.
Yeah, and when you think, I mean, I've talked to a few people on the show that have been teachers. When you think of the size of classrooms that they have, the pressure on teachers for targets. When we think back in the day, there wasn't quite the same awareness around dyslexia, and you just expected different lessons. You're then bustling on to the next lesson and the next and the next. It's just not. I mean, you must have felt like you were just quite lost in the system, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we all try and find our way and try to create our coping mechanisms to get through those earlier years in life. My mum is well, she's retired now, but she was a teacher and then a head teacher. So I guess I also did, and still do have great respect for anybody that goes into teaching
Yeah.
to support their education and the stress and especially after the last few years of with the pandemic and um, yeah, kind of that routine falling out for so many people in the country of schooling and how teachers had to adapt. I still don't think they've been given the credit that they deserve really for trying
Yeah.
to get young people through this kind of difficult time. So yeah, what do I think? I think yeah, we need to support teachers, and yeah, class sizes are a big problem. And I think yeah, as a teacher, sometimes you just got to make sure the behaviour's there, that people are listening. But yeah, if you're one person that's looking after 30 odd kids, I struggle. I've got two kids and I can't control them. So I have yeah, great respect for yeah, the teachers and the job they're doing.
So, and you talk. I read that you lost your dad tragically to suicide as a teenager, which obviously that just must have been really difficult to handle. Just talk us sort of through that. Are you aware what drove him to that to make that decision?
Yeah, yeah, and it was yeah, incredibly, as you said, a very tough time for myself and my family and yeah, friends of my dad. I was 17, sadly, when he took his life, and um yeah, it was. He had been ill for a while. Yeah, my dad was a very caring man. He was an innovator. He developed some of the first underwater housings for cameras. We kind of take it for granted now that we can get a camera and dunk it in underwater in a swimming pool. But he developed some of the first like housings for cameras
Mm.
that we use for kind of documentaries and work. Um, and but I think it was that pressure of running a business, going through a recession. Um, we were moving house around that kind of time, so I think there was a number of things kind of um, going on for him, and somebody who was very very outgoing to then being like school governor and being involved in lots of things. That depression kind of kicked in, and again, I think, well, I know now I would have responded differently to when he was ill, because we didn't talk about his illness. Nobody really knew that he was ill, and other than kind of GP visits and stuff, there wasn't really, again, much other than here's some tablets. Um, from my memory, there was no other kind of offer of help to kind of support him to deal with it with his illness. And so when he died, that came as a massive shock to so many people, because they didn't even know he had been that ill, and also we it was this was in the 90s. We've got better at talking about mental health now in the 2020s, but back then nobody talked about mental health. There was no, or if you talked about mental health, it was all really, really negative. It was, yeah. And so when he died, I didn't get any bereavement support or any counselling. It was just that kind of man up, bury that emotion as deep as you can, and just just keep plodding on, trying to go. So my
Mm.
mentality was try and support my mum. I've got two older brothers. We were close, supporting each other. Um, but again, something that we and still to this day find difficult to talk about.
Yeah. So what was the impact on you at the time, do you think, looking back now? How did that traumatic event
Mm,
affect you?
yeah, so I think it changed my life. I guess my dad's death, and I think as a teenager, I didn't realize how much it would go on to impact my life, his death, and especially by not dealing with it. Um, so yeah, it ended up, a few years later. So in 1999, I was in my first I kind of put it as my first real job. It was the start of the internet, and yeah, but that typical thing when you're in kind of first job or new job where you're wanting to kind of impress, you're working all the hours, you're not probably asking for help. My line manager at the time, I should have probably been asking her for more help and guidance. Um, but you know, I look back at it now, and obviously all the signs were probably there. I was working long hours, I was going out. There was quite a lot of parties, being the dot-com boom. It was an exciting time. I wasn't looking after my mental health, um, and I woke up one morning completely panicked, really, really scared. My partner at the time had already left for work. I'd overslept, and I just remember being incredibly paranoid and really, really scared. And I looked out of the window. I thought people were watching me. Um, my brother luckily came to get me, um, and it wasn't long before I was, you know, being sectioned and back in the hospital. That I had only been visiting my dad a few years previous. I was on the mental health ward that I'd actually visited my dad, and I look back now and see not dealing with my dad's death was one of those connecting factors to my own decline in mental health. And then the more I've done and work around mental health that I've done is about those that have been bereaved by suicide or have been impacted. They're just put straight away in a more high risk group. You know, the stats show that
Yeah.
um, the more the and so there's so much to unpick from my dad's death, and there's so much lessons that could be learned um, to to really reduce suicide, um, yeah, around the world. Um, but yeah, it's and it's gone on. We may talk about it later, but I was able to get the right help. I was off work for a year. It took me it was it took me a while to kind of get back. But once I was back on my feet, and able to go back into work, there was no way I was going to tell anybody about what had happened to me because that stigma in 2000 was just immense. You know, if you'd said you had a mental illness in
Yeah.
2000, um, yeah, you wouldn't be
Yeah.
employed, you wouldn't have relationships, you
And is
wouldn't,
that the
all of
sole
that would be out the
reason?
window.
Yeah, because you mentioned it took you 20 years
Mm.
to talk about it. So was the stigma, the fear of being belittled, laughed at, maybe held back in your career because people would think, well, you've had a mental illness in the past. When will it resurface? Is all that stuff what kept you in silence, or were there other things that stopped you from talking about it?
Oh, you're so right, Andrew. Yeah, all of that, that fear, that judgment of what people would think, um, yeah, 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 that real nervousness to show truly who I
Yeah,
was. Yeah, because I think kind of stemming from being dyslexic, I got quite good at learning different kind of coping mechanisms, or how not to talk about my dad, the types of
yeah,
questions, or I wouldn't get into certain conversations. um but I always thought, and especially the internet, when it in the early days was still a very small industry. So there was always in the back of my mind, they're like, oh, I bet they're thinking, oh, that's John, that's the one that went crazy at work, and that's the
yeah,
mad one. So you already think that people. I know now that people are more focused on generally on themselves than they are really thinking about you at all. But
yeah,
um, yeah, it was that stigma and that fear of if I was to say some of these things, and you mentioned as well, it's like, oh, will it? Oh, let's not. But we don't want him. It may happen again. Let's not put him under pressure, and almost like treating you with like kid gloves. It just
yeah.
it felt like there was no benefit to revealing what had
Yeah.
happened to
And
me
also
to
back in
friends.
the day, back then, so I remember some of the worst domestic abuse that I struggled with before I set my own business up, where then it was even more hidden. But I was working with a recruitment company in London, and they were all nice people, So um but nobody was vulnerable. You didn't show vulnerability. What are you talking?
Mm,
It was all banter. It was all about targets, and there was a friendly atmosphere there. But because nobody else revealed vulnerability, I'm not going to say actually I'm really struggling. The reason I haven't made it in last night is because it's all kicking off. I'm not coping. I wouldn't have dared say that, and then trying to hold it
mm.
together and hold it together and hold it together. My employment performance plummeted like a stone, and I remember the day I was about to get fired actually for poor performance, which would have been a fair call. I resigned to suffer that extra, to escape that extra
Yeah,
humiliation.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think now that there is more awareness, 20 years later, thankfully, of the value of being vulnerable. It's what we talk about with psychological safety. And I do think if we'd had it back then, I probably would have said something because it was a real struggle.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, things have changed. People are more open now to kind of at least be a bit more self-aware. Like I wasn't even self-aware when I didn't, for me, when I got ill, I it was a massive, it was obviously a horrific surprise. Um, so on one hand, yeah, because we are talking about it, because organizations, having speakers like yourself to go in and talk about these subjects are starting to open up that and change that culture within places. but it's still obviously a considerable way to go.
So how did you move forward following being sectioned? Kind of what is the stuff that really worked and helped you to make progress?
Yeah, for me, it was really, really slow. It took a real while for me to build my confidence back up. So, um, after being sectioned, um, I was then out of hospital, but again wasn't given any support, and actually kind of made an attempt on taking my own life as well. And that was really then that um, other support started to open up, and we found out that through my work, that was medical health insurance, and that got me access to um, day patients, very very luckily in the Priory. And so some of the things that really helped me early on, for me, was CBT, was meeting other people that were having their own mental health challenges and struggles. So not really, so whether that was around addiction, and it was nice to be in a space, a kind of a safe space where I could be vulnerable with other people from different backgrounds. Um, that really helped me to feel less alone, and thinking, oh, but this person here, they've got this and this, and that's happened to them. And I think that shared, or that empathy around and learning from other people that have had a mental illness has definitely been a great part of my recovery. Um, Doing some sort of physical exercise, um, it, as I say, when I was trying to get better, leaving the house really was like or getting out of bed, as I've said before, as in the past, it was like a marathon. It really was that fear of leaving the house, feeling I was going to get lost, or whatever, or bump into somebody I know. But it was those small steps of, you know, getting out, going for a walk, right, let's do a little run. And yeah, over the years, like physical exercise has definitely helped me, that especially if I'm getting a bit stressed, something where I can kind of go for a run, go for a walk, and try and figure out what's going on upstairs in my brain. Um, have yeah, have been definitely part of my recovery. I would say that
Yeah, because
those three things.
you say it was slow, and a lot of what you mentioned there, lots of little steps. It wasn't some just sort of great. Somebody helped you and they provided the breakthrough, and off you go. And I wonder whether often when we support people, we can be a little impatient. We've given them a bit of time. It's like, oh, come on, sort of pull yourself. It's been a few months, but actually, progress takes a long time and requires a huge amount of patience, particularly if you're supporting someone. An important lesson, I think, there.
Yeah, definitely. And like this year, I've had like a physical injury. I've kind of ripped like a meniscular tear, or I've had a tear or something in my knee. So I've not really been able to do any running since February. And I saw the physio last week, and he's like saying it's almost there, right? He's like kind of, I wouldn't recommend doing much running. It's almost better, but he would, it's going to be a year, right, just for that knee to recover. And again, we talk a lot about mental health and physical health, and yeah, something like that, we're a bit more sympathetic to, like, oh yeah, of course it's going to take longer for that muscle to rebuild or to recover. But yeah, you're right, with mental health. Yeah, there's sometimes yeah, people can lose their patience with people that are having challenges with their mental health.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we have moved on. I think back in the day, if you'd have broken your leg and you're off work, you'd have had a card signed by all the employees at work. If you're off with mental health issues, I think it'd have just been general confusion. But I think today we are generally moving towards a better place, which in a way is a good sort of segue into sort of talking about what you do today. And I'd love, to do tell our listeners, Jon, because you're doing some fab stuff. What are you doing today and why are you doing it?
Yeah, well, today I was just putting a blog live. on our Speakers Collective website for from one of our members. So the Speakers Collective was set up in around well, we kind of came together in 2018. So Johnny Benjamin, who I mentioned earlier, um, somebody who had been publicly speaking about mental health and the challenges he'd had growing up. Um, yeah, contacted a few of us that were talking on social media or to the media in general about mental health, and he sent an email along with a person called Joe Emerson, who was working with Johnny, and invited us all into a room in the city one afternoon. And so I was quite surprised to be invited, and then when I walked into the room, I just assumed that there was like 15, 16 people in that room that day, and I assumed everybody else knew each other. But it's only over time that I just realised that actually we nobody maybe people vaguely knew each other through social media and the work that they had done. But what Johnny was able to do was to kind of he had noticed that there was people that he could see that were sharing their lived experience that were having great impact on individuals or organizations. But actually, there was very little support there for the public speaker, the person with lived experience that was doing the heavy lifting. And that's something that I'd experienced myself when I shared my story for the first time. That um, you you can, depending on how you do it, you will get a lot of messages and reaction to that. Um, and out of that small group that came together that day, we came up with the name Speakers Collective, um, and we wanted to just create an informal group initially, just to support each other. Because also there were some times that maybe you'd be able asked to do a talk or an event, and maybe you were struggling with your mental health, or and actually this could be like a supportive community for somebody else to step in and do that talk on behalf of the other person. And over the years, that's now evolved to be a social enterprise. We've been going for 5 years now. We've got well over 150 members that have joined our collective. We provide monthly check-in calls for all of our members. Hopefully, try and raise the profile of the work our members are doing, and yeah, sometimes provide speaking opportunities. But foremost, really, this the Speakers Collective now. I think, it's just amazing the diversity and depth and range of conversations that our speakers talk about. So we initially were just a group of mental health speakers, but now, as your intro said, we pretty much you name something that is stigmatized or from a lived experience perspective, we probably have somebody that speaks about it. And again, we're very proud, Andrew, that you're one of the members and supporters of the Speakers Collective as well.
No, well, no, and it's great to be part of it. And for you, what is the one crucial thing that you want to see changed through operating the Speakers Collective?
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to see changed, and it is changing, is that we really value as a society the role that people play that share their own lived experience and how valuable they are in society to bring awareness and understanding of sometimes very difficult and complex subjects. Um, and I think sometimes you know you would have individuals that would go in and make a real big difference with a talk or maybe something that they've an event or something they've been involved in. But in the pecking order of like being paid, they're usually at the bottom, and there'd be other people that are other speakers in other areas that would be paid higher. And I think that was something that's also a real priority for me and Joe from the Speakers Collective as well. That also that people really, as well as supporting speakers, that actually if somebody is sharing their lived experience, there is a value to that.
Yeah.
And you know it's changing now, but definitely in 2018, a lot of the people that were doing an amazing amount of work, even changing policy and stuff, weren't being paid.
Yeah.
And yeah, we really got to change that. It's still lots of problems with people doing amazing work that are maybe get some of the recognition, but they're not being paid what they should be. And there really is a massive discrepancy in the funding that goes into certain projects. And then when it comes to the lived experience or the co-produced element, um, that lived experience usually forms like that whole kind of campaign. But still the person that's contributed to that idea sometimes isn't valued as much as some of the other people in the room.
Yeah, no, the lived experience does make a huge difference to your believability, credibility, to the richness of kind of angle and insight that you bring, and in people really being able to kind of see, really experience what you experience, almost like they were there. If you're a good storyteller as well and can talk about your lived experience in that compelling way, it's just so important. It's so much more memorable in some ways, even than someone that's researched it a lot but never experienced it. I mean, both have a value. Both have a value, but you do need a place. I definitely agree for sort of lived experience. You're talking about sort of men. Obviously, this is Men on Show, and you know my interests in sort of really exploring men's mental health and thinking about where men are at. From your perspective, doing so much in the mental health space as you do, we read so much about toxic masculinity. We read about male privilege, and yet we know from the data that the men and boys are struggling in many senses. Do you think men and boys are struggling? And if so, why would that be?
Yeah, well, the the kind of the most shocking stat that exists is that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. There is a massive problem that still exists today. Um, Suicide rates in men, you know, they're still pretty much kind of the same ish each year. Um, and so, yeah, we do have a problem in society where men are very sadly feel that that is the only option that they have when they yeah when they can't think of find another way to kind of to get help. So yeah, a lot is a big subject to unpack. I've got a son, a 9-year old son, and again, it's trying to like make sure that he's you know, being supported as well as around his own mental health. We're very lucky at the school that he goes to. They've got Place to Be, which is that
That's a great
it's
place to
actually
be.
kind
Yeah.
of built into school that there's a place if you want to go and talk about your feelings and emotions. Um, so that never had that as a child. Was what was growing up about feelings and emotions. We weren't even told to it was all boys don't cry. If you did cry, well, you'd get bullied even more, wouldn't you,
Yeah.
at school? So again, it's interesting looking at different age groups. I'm in my mid 40s, and so for me, I've kind of grown up around the loaded magazine culture, the FHM, the kind of the lad kind of Brit kind of that kind of culture, right? That was all very, very acceptable. Um, you know, which obviously now isn't. And I think being part of the Speakers Collective as well has been brilliant because I have got to meet so many different people who have had so many different life experiences. And I think what we really need to kind of build on for men is this empathy and understanding and um these kind of traits sometimes that we have to be beer and football and not talk about how we feel has to change
So there's
and
building on empathy, I suppose.
mm,
There's awareness. There's parenting styles that make a
mm,
difference. There's obviously provision from the very early stage at school. The Place to Be is a great program. I know of a few kids that I know of that have gone through that, and it's been really amazing to have that. Well, I didn't have that when I was when I was a kid. So some of those measures are really important, of course, and we need to think about how when I say scale them up, I mean also bring them up the age group. So if we're going to have a place to be in our schools, what do we put in place within our workplaces? But I know a comment that I often hear from sort of well-being directors that I speak to is that, look, we put this stuff on for blokes, but they don't show up. It's the women that show up. Even if it's intended for blokes, they're not showing up. So how do we engage men? What are some of the things we need to do?
Yeah, like it was fascinating. The first talk that I was asked to do, proper talk, was it was like men's mental health or something. And it was a few years ago. I didn't think anybody was going. I didn't think many people were going to turn up to it. I was kind of surprised. It was ended up being kind of standing room only, and but then the other big surprise, it was a room full, predominantly of women, and I was like, okay, right. And so we know why women go to events like that because they generally have a man in their life or somebody that they know that's a man that they're worried about. And so it's not that that event is any worse off for doing it, but yeah, there is a continual struggle for organisations or to engage with men. Um, and I think we just need to think about it differently. Sometimes that I'm a trustee of a charity now called Let's Talk About Loss, and they support um, they have support groups running up and down the country, bereavement support groups for young people aged 18 to 35. Um, and these groups have been, I'm very, very proud trustee. But also these groups around the country still are more, have historically been more females that have turned up to these groups. So we've been really working hard on how can we talk to guys, and I'm really, really pleased that just last month we put on an event um, in a pub in London, and that was all about men talk about loss. We got some brilliant speakers, a rapper called Shocker, and a mental health campaigner called Ben West. Um, and the kind of grief and alcohol and mental health is sometimes there's a bit of an area where you definitely kind of bit like, oh, do we want to mix the two? The other let's talk about loss meetings are usually in like coffee shops or places where there isn't any alcohol available. Um, but what was really lovely about the event that we did in London was it was with a brand called Lucky Saint, which is a non-alcoholic beer. And so we were able to do the event upstairs in the pub. um, it was Lucky Saint do a great non-alcoholic beer for anybody that's looking to either limit or maybe move away from alcohol. And it was just wonderful to see. I was like standing downstairs by the bar, just looking at the door. Just every time it kind of opened, I was like, "Oh, is that person coming to the event?" And one by one, on their own, guys turned up. Um, and if you walked into that room, didn't know it, you would have thought all of these guys knew each other. We had like 30, 40 guys in a room chatting, talking about grief. And again, it was like, we're onto something here. This is a space that works, that men feel comfortable coming to. So I'm not saying we should do all our events in pubs, but we were also just, you know, it's finding those spaces where men feel comfortable going. And there's some
Yeah.
great groups around the country, whether it's Andy's Man Gang, there's just so many other places that are starting to pop up now for men to kind of to talk about their feelings.
And I think there's a
But I think that's the
recognition.
challenge.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that some guys enjoy the talking groups, like Andy's Man Club, Andy's Man Gang.
Yeah.
There's the men's pie club in the Northeast. There's a
Mm.
proper bloke network. We had the founder
Book
of that on
club
the
and
show,
yeah.
where that's more sort of a walking club. We had Joe Horton from the Guild of Dads hiking group, and I I think we need more variety for men. There are some men that will engage in talking groups and some that won't. I think some men will engage with things as and when they feel they need them. So they won't attend a workshop on loss, but they might be glad of something that's available and open at the point where they feel that they need it. I definitely think that's a challenge. I have heard it said that, for some men, there's still this sense of if I go along and connect with some of these sort of men talk groups, then my boss might think I'm struggling, and I don't want my boss to think I'm struggling. So for me, it helps in terms of engaging men if leadership themselves are attending and showing, look, I'm coming, you lot come along too. We almost need those leadership ambassadors championing male health, championing men's communities, and that's the other thing I'm excited about. I don't know whether you see this, but I see so many men's communities growing organically now within organizations where organizations are saying we have a women's network with a big budget actually for their speakers. We have literally nothing for men. And actually, that
Mm.
needs to change. That needs to change. We need to be able to, we need to be adequately supporting our men and our women.
Yeah, completely, completely. And yeah, I think it's and it's a variety. It's looking as though those options, whether it is um yeah, that yeah, whether it is going for walking groups or I've been doing there's group that I was part of which is all around kind of music and mental health, and it was about just going to gigs together,
Yeah.
and we'd meet in a record shop and talk about the music that we liked. And so I think around those interests you can kind of tap into. um but yeah, I think definitely there's still a fear that I can guarantee every single one of those guys that came to the men talk about loss, they weren't like bounding through the door with
Yeah.
confidence, right? They were all like really quite nervous. And yeah, I think that, whereas I think if that was like a women's event, that would have been like groups of girls coming together, it would have been very, very different. Yeah, so I think we have to give men also a lot of credit as well. Um, to go into these events, because I think for men they historically do it on their own when they do go to these types of events, whereas I think sometimes what's out there for women, it's seen as normal that you would go with another person. And I don't know really how we change that sometimes to, yeah, as you say, is that leadership of somebody, another guy's bringing along another guy kind of a thing. um yeah,
I mean,
that's
my association with the pub, I think the pubs are really important. I think we can use our pubs an awful lot more than we do in terms of men's mental health. I know when I walk into a pub, I feel immediately relaxed and up
mm,
for a chat. Whereas if you put me in a room in a community centre, same event, there's coffee and biscuits, I'll be like,
mm.
yeah. Whereas
And
put me in a pub with a pint in my hand, I'm gregarious straight away. It could be a really lousy pub as well. I feel
yeah,
differently because I'm in the pub.
yeah, and it's trying to recreate those kind of spaces, isn't it? It's just because alcohol again can be a real trigger and a difficult. It could be sometimes a causing what's a we talk about how men deal with different challenges in life, and rather than not talking, we take part in more risky behavior, drinking. It's that's kind of that's the problem with the pub environment, but also that is where that's your captive audience, right? So um yeah, I think it's an interesting one to try and figure out.
So you in your wider work, obviously you do the Speakers Collective stuff is really important work. I love the promotional work you do around mental health speakers. They have so much to give and offer, and we've still got a long journey to go on yet. Obviously, your wider work is very much involved in the digital space. So, how do you see men portrayed on social media, mainstream media? What do you see as the messaging around men?
Yeah, so there's some really good, campaigns that have been done around aimed at men. So there's a website called the Book of Man that does some really interesting articles and content, and team up with different individuals that kind of, I think, whether it's comedians or footballers. So I think that kind of works quite well. Um, what it's still, yeah, I think still some parts of like Instagram, for example, still feel like quite a female space when it comes to mental health. I learn so much from the people that I follow. That could be like people like Bryony Gordon, who does a lot of campaigning around mental health. Um, and so for me, social media has been really good to learn about, yeah, mental health and what people are doing, but also, yeah, also social media in itself is has become such a like a difficult place to be, So and there's so much argument that happens on Twitter, and you know it is quite toxic in certain parts of social media. So I think what's yeah, quite nice about the things that I put out on social media and the content that I kind of create, I think, does reach
Yeah.
both genders. Um,
Do you think
but
there's like, so we had Charlie Bethel, CEO of UK Men in Sheds, on the podcast. And he talked about how I asked him what some of the challenges were they faced at Men in Sheds. And they have like over 1,000 sheds in the UK. And they
mm,
tried to set up a shed one time. But where they were going to do it, these are just guys coming together to make stuff, upcycle stuff, and all of that. Where they were going to do it, it was in this space used by other charities, including the Women's Institute. But because the space was opposite a school, they were refused because they were deemed a safeguarding risk simply because they're men. And I
mm,
wonder how much of that kind of anti-male sentiment you see in the press. We have, for example, Wayne Couzens, and a tragic and terrible situation. Uh, One of the outcomes being in the press, at least, a call to the police need to sort of create more robust measures as they scrutinize future police officers. Yet with Lucy Letby, there's no such call that we need to spend more on scrutinizing future nurses. And there's almost this disparity in the media. Do you see that yourself at all?
I kind of like to see a breadth of the media. I like, I'll look at different media's outlets and seeing how they're reporting on certain stories. And I think it is that reminder of around why it's important to have these spaces. And when these horrible, um, horrific crimes that happen that involve men, rightly so, everybody should be completely disgusted, and that this that shouldn't happen. Of course, it shouldn't happen. Um, and so I think you know, that we've got to work on this together, and try and figure out how has this come about, and then this trying to make it a male female kind of debate is like trying to create these understanding and support on both sides. Um, but yeah, it's yeah difficult, isn't it, where you hear these stories of other men that are trying to put groups together to support other men, that are getting having these kind of barriers put in their place, for what probably is no particular reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about allyship, where we men and women stand shoulder to shoulder, um, in calling stuff out. We should be
Mm,
calling out misogynistic behavior when we see it, and I would extend uh, a plea to women as well, where they see comments that are really quite misandry, obviously, sort of the hatred and sort of dissing men,
mm,
that we call that out as well. We want to raise
mm,
healthy men and boys. Where I talk to teachers, there's a teacher again I had on the podcast, a couple of episodes ago, where he was asked by a boy, "Am I toxic?" Simply because he's a boy and he's heard all about toxic masculinity, and so for me, I'm passionate that we create that we tackle the media actually, and that we try to have a more balanced and helpful message about people. And that for me, allyship is understanding that there are destructive people in the world, men and women, destructive towards themselves and others. And I'm not a big fan of the toxic masculinity as a phrase. I don't think it's helpful
Mm.
as a phrase, nor toxic femininity for that point. How you but so from your perspective, obviously you've had your own journey with mental health. You do so much in the mental health space. You know, if there's one thing that we could do to help men and boys be the absolute best version of themselves, what is there something that would for you, it's like, yeah, this is the thing. Like, there's loads of things we can do and should do, but we need to prioritize this.
Yeah. Yeah, for me and my son, it's been important to try. I've learnt kind of the times of day when I'm more likely to get a conversation out about how he's feeling. Um, it's it's the books that I buy my son to kind of give him hopefully that knowledge and see different role models, and so he can get a diverse viewpoint of what different boys and men can be like. I think is really important. I think these, especially the reason I talk about mental health and do the work I do is because of my two kids, because I know that they're currently 9 and 11, but when they get slightly older, there'll be times when they won't want to talk to me. Um, but it's trying to instill that knowledge within them, that that understanding, just to really try and embrace, accept the good bits and the bad bits about yourself, and try not to be so judgmental of yourself. Is really what I'm trying very, we'll see how well I get on in my kids. But I think it is that role models. It's really important at a very early age. Leadership, that level of empathy. What's happening within the classroom. Also being aware of their friends, and just you can see things whether that you know kids have been singing about Andrew Tate in the playground, right? How does that happen? It's this stuff needs to be addressed. We do need to have these kind of conversations. But coming back to that statistic of suicide being the biggest killer in men under the age of 50, we we've got to be doing so much more to support boys, young men, older men, um, to feel that they can, yeah, be who they really want to be. Because I think sometimes there's a lot of men that are struggling with their identity, um, and who they really are, just because of the way that they've been told to behave or act in a certain way, that can then creating some quite bad kind of behaviors.
Yeah, one of the things I know a lot of mental health speakers advocate, and I do this with my boys before they go to bed, and it does actually, they really like it. 10 and 7-year-old, 4-year-old, we talk about what made him happy, sad that day, and anything that he's worried about. My 7 and 10-year-old mark themselves out of 10 for the day on how they feel, whatever score they gave, the question being why, and also why is it not lower than it is, and why is it not higher than it is, unless it's a 10, of course. Um, and that's just as a little thing has got them talking about how they feel. And then for me, that's just a real small thing. And I suppose it's, everything you're saying is absolutely spot on. And I suppose it's as well trying to find the little things that we could deliver. We're all busy as parents, we're all under huge amounts of pressure. So, what are the small, easy wins that we could deliver on consistently to get our kids used to talking about stuff, analyzing stuff as they get older as well, so that when they look at Andrew Tate, they fact check some of the things he's saying. and some of the things he's claiming, rather than just taking it as gospel truth and really thinking about, well, if it's on Instagram, it doesn't necessarily mean it's real. These are all the small and quick and easy wins, I suppose, that we can do. And then I suppose, like you've said, the place to be, growing that, making sure stuff like that's available. Hopefully we can make progress on it. I'd love to think that one day we see a zero suicide society. I'd love to see that day, um, and take that as a real, I mean, it's an extraordinary target, but it's one that I think we could achieve with the right things in place.
Yeah, and there's Zero Suicide Prevention Alliance have also got some amazing online training that's free, that anybody can do. That's really helps you identify those, yeah, I guess those signs that maybe somebody's in trouble, and then how to intervene, how
Sure.
to get somebody, whether that is actually calling 999, or um, yeah, getting signposting to the right kind of help and support. Because yes, suicide is such a horrible word to say. It's such an emotional word to talk about, but we do need to talk about it more, and we do need to be able to know where to signpost, or where the support groups are and particularly are there for they do exist, for men. There are groups out there. um, there is support and things that people can get involved in.
So how do people find you, John, online? How do people connect with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so where you can find out about the Speakers Collective at speakerscollective.org. I'm just Jon Salmon on social media, so that's Jon, salmon like the fish. And yeah, I'm always, I like collaborating, working with different people that have got ideas. I think what's been lovely, we're working on a project at the moment, all about connection, that's going to come out in January 2024, for the mental health day called Great Mental Health Day. And that, we're using, Beth is a trained dancer, and we're using kind of dance and people writing messages of hope, and it's going to be hopefully a really impactful campaign. So I think kind of, yeah, if you've got an idea, the whole idea of the Speakers Collective is supporting people that want to make change happen. And we really like to kind of join the dots to make things happen. So I'm really, you know, open for, yeah, connection and collaboration.
Brilliant. And a final message of encouragement to the men and boys listening to this podcast. What's your message of encouragement to them?
Yeah, just that sounds cheesy, isn't it? But try to love yourself as even a little bit. I think kind of as guys that we don't give time to reflect on, we're always trying, sometimes putting kind of pressure on ourselves to be bigger or better, or this competitive part. But I think sometimes, you know to use a little bit of time for reflection, um yeah, to be a bit kinder to yourself, and also, yeah, like, if you need to talk, there are places to talk to. You've got the Samaritans that can be called on 116 123. Don't want to talk, you can text shout on 85258. Or you've got the Hub of Hope, which is an amazing website and app which will signpost you to resources and groups in your local area. So I think it's, yeah, a bit of self-love, as the artist Shocker talks about, was talking about recently. And yeah, don't yeah, be a bit more vulnerable. Let that guard down, and yeah, lean into some of those emotions that you may be suppressing. And it really is, talk to a friend if you're struggling, and yeah, or somebody that you can trust. And that was the biggest takeaway, that when I talked about, you know, suicide and mental illness, the messages that came back were not like, John, you weirdo, oh,
Yeah.
what's all this? The messages that came back was, oh, I felt like that, or I've been suicidal, or, and this was all backgrounds, from chief execs to my hairdresser. So I think that sometimes we can be very nervous about sharing our feelings and emotions as guys. But my experience in doing that, taking away that brick wall of suppressing those kind of feelings and emotions by kind of like chipping away at that wall um, internally, I feel a lot better for that. I feel a massive weight off my shoulders. Um, and it sometimes can feel like a really big step to take to admit that maybe something's not right in your life. Um, but I can only say from my own personal experience, but I just wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd spoken up a bit sooner, and I think that though with my dad's suicide, if I'd got the right kind of help, gone to the right kind of spaces as you talked about, Andrew, that I felt comfortable in, maybe I wouldn't have had that mental health crisis. So that's my real message, really, to anybody who listen. That if you're listening and you're feeling like that you are struggling a bit, that's completely fine. But do something about it.
Brilliant. Jon, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew.